Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Emily Sally. I work with Nationally Competitive Awards here on campus, and I am joined by our fabulous director, Dr. Pat Whitlow. She is serving as my producer, as we like to say, and running in the background. So if you have any questions that you want to put in the chat or have anything like that, please let us know. Also joined today by our two superstars, Michael and me here, who have received this scholarship previously. And so they are going to share their experiences with the Critical Language Scholarship, and we are going to learn a little bit more about them and meet them in just a few minutes. So one quick housekeeping note, we are recording this session. Our office has a YouTube channel that we post these info sessions on for students that can't join us live. So please be aware of that. If you want to stay camera off, that's absolutely fine. Also, we will leave plenty of room at the end for questions. But if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat, or I think we're a pretty small group, so at the end we can unmute and just ask questions as we go. So again, thank you so much for being here. Our office works with students who are applying for external fellowships and scholarships here at UK. So the Critical Language Scholarship is just one of the awards that we work with. So if you have any questions about any awards, please feel free to reach out at any time. So I am going to just kind of go over a few of the basic details about the Critical Language Scholarship. CLS is a summer study abroad program that is focused very heavily on language immersion. So you apply for a particular language, not a country or an area. And there are 15 critical languages that are part of the program. And on an upcoming slide, I do have a list of those languages if you have not seen those yet. The program is fully funded by the US government. So you can see on the slide on your screen what all is covered. So it's pretty much everything, including if you decide to gain academic credit through the program, that is included, as well as kind of all of your basics, housing and meals, instruction, round trip airfare, all of those things. The Critical Language Scholarship is for students in all fields, and me here can probably talk to that in a little bit because he's a political science major. And so you do not have to be a language major by any means to apply for the Critical Language Scholarship. When you are applying, you definitely need to be able to articulate and talk about why studying this particular language will help you in your educational and your career future. But you do not have to be a language major. So I know that a lot of students find out about this in their language courses, but if you are a major that is not a language major, that is completely okay. And so the 15 critical languages are designated as those because they are critical to US national security and economic prosperity. So here is a list of the 15 languages. As you can see on the left, those are all the languages that do not require any experience in the language. On the right, you can see Arabic, Korean, Portuguese, and Russian requires 1 year of study. And that is by the time you begin the program. So if you are currently in Arabic 101 and you are planning to take Arabic 102 in the spring, then you would be eligible to apply for next summer. 2 years of study is required for both Chinese and Japanese. So, okay, quick eligibility. I don't want to just read these at you, but mainly you are, since this is a program that is funded by the US government, you're required to be a US citizen or national, and you have to be enrolled in a degree granting program at a US institution. And so if you are currently a senior, maybe who's graduating in May, you are able to apply for next summer, even if you won't be enrolled in a degree granting program by that point. You just have to be enrolled in a US-based institution at the time of your application. And as I said earlier, strong candidates come from all academic majors, all backgrounds. Basically, if you have an interest in the language, you are encouraged to apply. One thing to note, our students can probably talk a little bit about this when they introduce themselves, but the CLS program is very much a cohorted program, meaning that you are in a small group of students and you really have a pretty specific schedule that you all follow. So like you'll see everyone shares the same weekly schedule, people go on specific cultural activities, you have 20 hours of language courses. So it's really designed to help you as a group. So if you are hoping to do a study abroad program that is super independent, or that you are able to really schedule the things that you want to do at particular times, this might not be the best fit for you, just because it is more of a cohorted program. And then, of course, the program is designed for language gains and cultural immersion. You are assigned a language partner as part of the program, and I know our students are going to talk about that in just a little bit. All right, so program benefits, it's designed to help you make substantial gains in your language skills in a short period of time. So they estimate that you will get through about 2 semesters worth of coursework. Again, you can get academic credit if you decide to do that. And we also have our education abroad, a couple of our colleagues from education abroad here, if you have any questions about how that would transfer back to UK or anything like that. You also get a certificate kind of showing where you are in terms of your language skills at the end of the program. And then most likely, if you are here, you probably know why it's important to study a foreign language, but it can help advance your career, gives you an advantage when going to graduate school, applying for jobs, all those types of things. All right, so we'll get into the good stuff. I'm going to let our students introduce themselves. Our first student is Michael, and he is actually in graduate school now, but was at UK, graduated in May, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And he actually did the Critical Language Scholarship program twice, once last fall, right in the middle of the crazy COVID times, and then this past summer as well. And so, fun fact about Michael, he actually helped get Korean language courses brought to UK. So if you are currently in a Korean language course, you should give Michael a virtual high five, because he had a really big hand in that. So Michael, I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about your experience and about yourself.
All right. First of all, I want to say thank you for that introduction. So yeah, I'm trying to think of where to start actually, because these two experiences were really similar in some ways, but also really different. I guess I should start by mentioning why I exactly did it. I did it twice. I had originally applied for CLS Chinese before COVID, and at the time when the pandemic really began to pick up, they ended up canceling the program in its entirety. Right before the summer began, the CLS program announced they would have one class available for Chinese online. And unfortunately, I didn't participate in that. But because they felt it was very successful, they offered the same opportunity to alternates of the CLS program in the fall. I did that, and the program said that it wouldn't affect your eligibility for future programs. So I applied again, thinking that perhaps in 2021, things would be a bit better, a little bit naively, I know at this point. And then I got to do it again over the summer. So both experiences were virtual, but I did really enjoy them because I think first and foremost, it's an excellent opportunity to learn the language you're studying. Even though it was virtual and I didn't get to go to China, I still studied with Chinese universities. And that also involved getting used to Chinese social media apps. Zoom isn't available in China, so I had to use the Chinese equivalent, DingTalk, and also use WeChat and other apps to talk with my language partner and really engage with the program, even though I couldn't physically be there. I did enjoy it a lot, though. I felt I learned quite a bit. Sometimes, given the time difference between the US and China, Hours could be a little difficult because in the fall, for example, all of my classes were at 7:30 or 8. But during the summer this last year, it tended to be, I believe, 8 to 10 a.m. So not terrible, especially if you're a morning person, but it was another thing to get used to. I know I'm kind of rambling, so I'll finish up in a moment. Overall, though, I'd say the experience was really great. We did virtual cultural activities, which at times were a bit difficult to really have happen since you couldn't be there, but we did some really cool things. I remember over the summer, for my program, our teachers went to a nearby city in Northeast China and took us on a virtual tour of a market there, which was really interesting because it was in an ethnic minority Korean city. So very different from what we might expect China to be like. And other experiences that I really enjoyed were speaking with my language partner about our interests, learning more about her hometown and the things she liked to do. And overall, I felt like despite it being online, the program was a great way to get to know people and learn more about China.
Great, thank you so much. And I should add, CLS is hoping to have all of its programs abroad in person this coming summer. However, like Michael said, we have all learned to be flexible. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know, but that is the plan, and hopefully that will move forward. Okay.
Michael, can I ask a quick question before me here talks about his experience?
Sure.
Can you mention how much Chinese study you had at UK when you applied? And then also, how much Chinese language growth did you get? Did you get the full year, given that it was virtual and it was a little shorter, or?
That's a very good question. I studied Chinese for all 4 years while I was at UK. So I did the fall program during the first semester of my 4th year of Chinese at UK, and I did the summer program right after finishing 4 years. So in both years, I was in the advanced level rather than the intermediate level. As for how much I felt like I gained, that's a good question because I guess it is important to say, I think we all know this after this last year. Online learning has a lot of advantages, but it's not the same as being in person. I still felt like I learned a lot, and I don't want to sound like I'm saying I didn't, because I definitely did. But I think you have to be prepared for developing different kinds of learning strategies to what you might have once been used to. And I'm sure we all know this by now after a year of doing basically all our courses online. But I'd say in terms of how much I got, maybe I can't really quantify if it was a year or not, just because since I finished that year by year curriculum by the time I did the summer program this last year, it would be difficult to say, but I definitely did learn a lot. Every week we'd go through an entirely new lesson that involved a lot of reading, a lot of speaking, giving presentations, and I do feel it definitely helped me a lot.
Thank you.
And were you in a Chinese course at UK while you were doing CLS, or did you end up doing CLS that fall that you were here?
I was in a class, so I had to go between Chinese 401 at UK and then having my online course at like 7 or 8 a.m. every other day during the week.
Okay, so a lot that semester, I would say.
It was.
Great, great, awesome, thank you. All right, so me here studied Swahili over the summer. His program was also virtual, and he is currently a political science major here at UK. And so I will let him tell you a little bit about his experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about CLS. It's something I'm really excited to talk about because I think I learned so much. So I was a complete beginner at Swahili. I knew how to say hello and I think to count to 3 on my OPI benchmark call. So there was a lot of learning that I had to do over the summer. But I think one thing that I was really hammered in by the CLS faculty was that they know that everybody's at different levels and is just here to learn about the language, which means not only the language itself, but the country and the culture that comes with it. And so one thing that I really appreciated was that for all of the language learning that we were doing throughout the day, We would also have culture sessions once or twice a week where you could meet local business owners and just people in the community who were really making a difference there. And even though it was virtual, I feel like I really got a nice sort of image and screenshot of what life in Tanzania was like as a result of these culture sessions. As well as so CLS in Swahili was broken down on smaller cohorts based on your ability level as well. So I was in a cohort of 5 or 6 people who are all sort of at the same speaking ability as I was. And so we got really, really close because you're spending a lot of time with these people, just going through the same processes. Everybody's struggling with the same grammar rules, with the same verb tenses and noun classes and things like that. And so you get really close with your cohort, especially. And to this day, we still talk about how we meet Swahili speakers out in the community doing our own thing, and how it's amazing that you can speak with them. I think one thing that CLS is also really, really good at is because it is an intensive program, you will learn a lot in a really short period of time. And so I could see within the first week or two, tangible differences in like the amount of Swahili that I was able to understand and read. And they also understand that at the beginning, at least, you're not going to understand a ton. And so just pick up on what you can. But over the summer, I really saw a huge amount of growth, and it's still amazing to me that I didn't know more than a couple words in Swahili in June, and by the end of July, I could speak to a native person, hold a conversation. And so I think CLS is a great opportunity, not only for the languages that you're learning, but also because you understand so much of the culture and can sort of connect with the community in the countries that your language is spoken in, which I think is absolutely amazing.
Great, thank you so much.
If you don't mind me jumping back in.
Sure, of course.
I actually think Mihir talked about some stuff I should have mentioned too. He said you have small cohorts for your different language levels. I want to say, like, I think it's the same for every language. With Chinese, it was at least, and it's a really great feature. I think my class had 6 people, and even though it was online, we still got to know each other pretty well. I actually met up with one of the people in my cohort just a few weeks ago. So even if it's online, you can meet some fantastic people through the program, and having that small group to go through these different levels together with is really helpful and provides a lot of support.
Great. And we actually have a question in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and read this to you. And this is probably a question for Michael based on a quick scan of it. Regarding the languages that require previous years of experience, are applicants required to take a language test prior to acceptance? If so, what language test is, or study? If so, what language test is needed, and are costs covered? Further, for someone whose language learning in a specific language has had gaps, for instance, haven't had a particular language course in over a year because of scheduling, would you recommend applying for that language or one that does not have any experience requirements if there are entrance exams?
All right, that's a great question. So it doesn't matter if you're applying for a language that requires a year or more of experience or not. If you have studied the language before, you will have to take a language test. However, you do the test after you've been accepted. So like for Chinese, for example, you just submit proof that you've taken Chinese for 2 years. It's very easy if you have it on your transcript. I personally don't think it'll matter very much if it's been a year or so since you took classes, as long as you explain why. But once you are accepted, you're required to do a proficiency test beforehand. And that's just kind of to measure what class you're going to be in. As for the actual application, there's no proficiency test as part of it. Once you're in, then they'll figure out what level you are. And with that being said, I'm not sure what language you're considering, but if it is a language you're passionate about, even if it's been a year or so since you've taken courses, I personally recommend going with it. We're going to talk about the essays in a couple minutes, but a big part of writing these essays is talking about why you care about what you're learning. And I personally just think with this very little bit of knowledge, knowing that you studied it before, that's definitely a good sign. And I think that there's almost certainly stuff you could talk about if it's what you're interested in.
Great, thank you so much.
And Michael,
Um,
they asked if there was any cost to the exam, but my understanding is there is no cost for
No,
that.
it's entirely free. Sorry, forgot to mention that.
All right. And so, speaking of the essays, we will move on to talk a little bit more. And I see we have a couple more questions in the chat. We will get to those, I promise. We are going to talk just a little bit about the application. CLS is a direct application, but we strongly encourage you to work with our office in terms of your written materials. So you can apply for this scholarship without receiving any feedback, but Dr. Whitlow and I have both reviewed for the Critical Language Scholarship, and so we are more than happy to give you some feedback and suggestions on any of your written materials. So the deadline is November 16th, which sounds like it's a far way away, but I promise it really is not. So go ahead and start thinking about your application and keeping us posted on if you are planning to apply. As I said earlier, you just apply for a language, not necessarily a specific country or specific site. And your application requires an unofficial transcript, which you can get from My UK. They've changed it to where you only have to have one recommendation, and that is a form from a faculty member. And so they don't necessarily write you a letter. It is prompts that they have on the application. There are 4 short answer essays that are between 200 and 300 words. And then you also have to do a personal statement kind of talking about your interest in the program. So overall, I think one of the things that we see in our office the most is that students don't necessarily give enough specifics in their application. And so a lot of times it's very vague information about, I might use this language in this way, or, I've studied abroad and it went well, but the student doesn't really give specific examples of the things that they did to have a positive experience. So that's something that we definitely encourage students to do, is to think about what kind of sets you apart, and make sure that you get that across, because with this application, there is no interview process. It is all about your written materials. So you want to make sure you get all of your information to the reviewers in your written materials. In terms of those 4 short answers, there we go. I'm going to have Michael and me here kind of talk a little bit about 2 of them each and give you some tips and some thoughts on the essays.
Okay. I believe I was going to talk about the first 2. Mihir, are you doing 3 and 4?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right then. So essay number 1, as you can see right here, is about resilience. This is really an essay where they want to just gauge how much you'll be able to adapt to living in a new environment. For many people, CLS is their first experience going abroad to a country that speaks the language they're studying, and it's very intensive. So it's a lot, and they want to make sure that you're able to handle that. So in this essay, they're really looking for examples of how you've adapted in the past to show that you're ready to adapt for the future when you go abroad, hopefully. For this one, of course, there's many different ways to go about it, but the way I personally looked at the resilience essay was thinking about another experience I had abroad where I faced a challenge. Of course, this might be something more unique to my situation, but it doesn't have to be something that occurred abroad. If you can think of an example in your life where you really overcame a certain struggle that you want to talk about, chances are it's a great subject to talk about. Of course, do what you're most comfortable with, and because you know yourself best. For me, though, I chose to talk about having to go to a hospital in another country and learning how to navigate that system, especially when I didn't know the language very well. So for me, I chose that because I felt like it hit a lot of different points that this essay is looking for. It wants to know that you've been in a situation where things might not have been as familiar as you're normally comfortable with. and that also you were able to overcome it. You got through things, you explained how you did. I feel like some key things to point out are like how you reacted initially versus how you came to deal with the situation at hand over time, and then eventually how it was resolved. So in that regard, I feel like it's really an opportunity to show people how you were faced with a problem and how you got through it. For the second essay, preparation for the CLS program, I really like this one because it's really asking you, what do you think will be the most challenging? And how are you going to deal with that? I won't go through every last word of this second question, but long story short, it's kind of going off of the same thing. When you're in another country, you're going to face a lot of challenges just because it's a very intensive program and you'll be in an entirely new environment in most cases. So in this one, they want to know, what do you see being one of the most difficult parts, and how are you going to deal with that using your current skill set? So in a way, it's kind of looking for some similar things. They want to see you identify something that might be a challenge and underline how you can deal with that and cope and grow stronger through it. For me, I chose to write about public transportation. I chose this because I did a similar program to CLS in high school. And when I was studying abroad then, transportation was a big problem for me. I was not good at it. So I thought that when I looked at this essay, I was like, okay, this is something I've struggled with in the past, because Lexington doesn't exactly have the largest public transportation system in the world. And when you go to a city like Beijing or Seoul, it's going to be completely different. And I decided to talk about that, learning how to navigate that system. And some of the ways I said I would deal with it were drawing from my past experiences, where if I really had trouble, I might ask someone for help. I would study transportation related vocabulary, learn to read maps in my target language. So what I was really trying to do was list tangible ways I can grow to be more comfortable in this situation and better know what I'm doing. For everyone, this part will be completely different for you. It'll be unique every time. Perhaps what you're most worried about is language study within the classroom or living with a host family. But once you've identified the aspect of the program that you see might be a challenge, think of specific ways that you can cope with that and use it as a way to show not only your passion for studying, but also your passion for really living in the dynamics of the moment, not just learning the language statically, but also embracing the society you're in wholeheartedly and taking this challenge as an opportunity to grow.
Thank you so much. That's great advice. I am actually going to ask, we have several more questions, so I'm going to do a couple of questions before we move on to questions 3 and 4. The first one is, does CLS have any career development aspects similar to Boren, which is one of the other awards that we work with? So as a CLS alum, I don't know if that's terminology, do you all have access to any resources or anything like that? And did you do any type of career development during your program?
So I know that at least recently, there was like a career fair for some of the like opportunities available within the State Department that were sort of could have utilized the languages that we were learning. So I know that there is like at least some connection and like networking. You're part of like alumni group chats and like Facebook groups. And so it's like you're connected with a lot of the alumni who are sort of in different positions in their career. And then I also believe there's like some benefits to hiring within the state government once you're a CLS alum. I think it's called non-competitive eligibility. And it's like for the next like 1 or 2 years, you're sort of a couple steps along the process if you are trying to work for the State Department or government.
I also know that I attended a webinar about CLS probably 2 weeks ago, and they actually mentioned that they are doing kind of an alumni refresh program where previous CLS recipients can kind of come back and study through the CLS program again and kind of update their skills, which is really awesome. All right, so me here, take it away.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So for the citizen diplomacy essay, I thought this is a really fun one to write just because you're talking about yourself basically. And this is sort of your opportunity to share what you think makes you unique, and then how you think you are capable of not only being like a connoisseur and steward of your own, of being American and your own identity, but then also how you can use your newfound knowledge in CLS as a way to bring that back home, and really make a difference, like spread culture, spread awareness about a lot of different issues. So this one I think was super interesting just because it makes you sort of think about yourself and what sort of qualities that you have that will make you like a unique person and like the right person to have this opportunity. And so I honestly like really struggled with this one at first, just because I didn't know, like I was giving out like really abstract words and things like that, and I didn't really know what I was like what I could bring to the table. And I think one thing that really helped me was make a list of what I think I identify as. So Indian American, like someone who was born in the United States, things like that. And I really like tried to look into each one of these sort of identities and see how that would translate to the CLS experience. So I know for this essay, I believe I wrote about being Indian American and how my experience in going back to India and talking to my family over there was different than being Indian here, and having like that experience of being an Indian in America. And so the way I sort of weaved that together was like through music. And I talked about how music is something I'm super passionate about. And so how sharing music was a way for me to sort of bridge these identities and really make sure that I was being an advocate of my identity and of my culture, and that I sort of had the experience of working in between these two communities that were so different. So I think this is a really fun opportunity to really look into yourself. I would recommend listing out each one of your identities, like what you think you identify as, and then seeing if there's any way for you to bridge all of those together, and translate that to how CLS would help you and how you could help CLS in their mission of trying to bridge together a lot of different cultures. So this is definitely one that I think is really focused on identity. And then the fourth essay, I think, is probably like the most direct essay, and also the one where specifics are super important. So this is a very like basic, what would you do with CLS after you were done with the program, and why are you choosing to do CLS right now? And so I think this one is like a very, very direct and like straightforward essay. So you can literally I talked about my career goals, and how I wanted to be an immigration lawyer, and then how CLS and my Swahili fluency would help me achieve those goals. And then also when it comes to choosing Swahili, for example, I talked about an internship that I had and how I was dealing with Congolese refugees and how they speak Swahili. And so I think this one, especially specificity, where you're listing off exact experiences that you've had, and very, very concrete experiences that you've had, is what will really help you hit home on this essay in particular. But this is a very direct essay, I would say, and you can be pretty straight to the point when it comes to it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those tips. I think one of the things too to keep in mind is that I think all of these essays are supposed to be between about 200 and 300 words, which is not a lot. And so you really have to get to the point. You know, I think that we are kind of taught when we are writing to kind of intro what we want to say it, and then kind of sum it up. And a lot of times with these essays, you don't necessarily have the room to do that. So just keep that in mind, that you have a limited space to talk about the things that you need to talk about. All right. So this last slide just has some of our office information on it. Like I said, we are more than happy to give you some feedback, help you kind of review your written materials. So that is my contact information, my email and my phone number. So by all means, please reach out to me if you would like that help. We do find that students that do receive feedback either from myself, Dr. Whitlow, a professor, someone in education abroad, people that receive feedback do tend to do better in these types of selection processes. You can also learn more about CLS at their website. And then these are our social media channels. We post a lot of award opportunities, student spotlights, all types of things on those. So please follow us. And also, as I said earlier, we do have a YouTube channel where we post info sessions like this. So if you have an interest in another award, we probably have an info session on it with a past recipient. So please be sure to check those out. So we do have a few more questions. Let's see here. This is a good one. Is preference given to students that have taken classes, so formal classes, over those that have studied the language independently? Michael,
I
Michael has a
have
smile.
no idea, unfortunately. When I actually, I might be able to say something about that. My freshman year, I applied for CLS Korean because I had studied Korean before coming to college. At the time, UK didn't offer Korean. So I really had to think, how was I going to apply for this if my school doesn't have an official program? I don't know how much of a bearing that had on my application. I got alternate rather than finalist. So at the very least, they considered me. But I imagine the most important thing to do in that case, if we don't offer the language at UK, is talk about how you're going to study the language informally or outside of the classroom when you get back. Really push how you're going to do that. I feel like showing the passion makes a huge part of the difference. So as long as you show you have a plan, I would imagine that it makes a difference. But again, I'm not an expert.
And if I could make a small addendum to that, Michael, just because I've had an opportunity to review for CLS. And so I went through some of their training. And I think people do look at the transcripts and do look at the language ability, but I think they also understand that people have other ways that they come to language. Sometimes people are heritage speakers, right? Or they lived in a country when they were younger. They have different ways that they come to it. But I think it's helpful for students, instead of just saying, oh, I've been listening to the Duolingo app or Mango or something, and so I feel like I have a year's, I think is to find some way to mark that. So to say, although I've been studying independently, I went and had a conversation with a faculty member in the Chinese department to get a sense of where I am. Or I have a chance to use this language because I volunteer for Kentucky Refugee Ministries. And so maybe me here, you know what I mean, had a chance to meet people with this language. And so I know I'm making some progress. Or I have been specifically, we had a student a few years ago and they talked about, they were very into K-pop and they were watching things online and on YouTube channels and learning Korean that way, but they talked about specific things, it was a specific program that they watched. So I think it's very helpful for you if you're an independent language learner, if you can talk about some of the ways that you've done that besides just asserting that you studied it. Giving people some of those concrete details. This is what I did. This is how many hours a week, or I spent this whole summer doing this while I was working on a job and I was listening to the language all the time, in my earbuds or something. But allowing people to sort of see how you studied the language, not just stating that you did.
Right, kind of quantifying it almost.
Yeah, a little bit.
Right.
And in some cases, if your recommender is somebody that could also confirm that, I think that could be helpful. That would maybe only be in a few cases, but if they could, I would certainly ask them to address that.
Okay, another question kind of about a similar thing. I am currently learning Chinese, but I will have 1 year by summer on my transcript. However, I've been learning for over 2 years, so would I not be able to apply to Chinese? I think it would probably be helpful, Alexis, if we had a little bit more specific. So if you wanted to reach out to me or Dr. Whitlow directly. But I would say it's possible that you might be able to, I assume you're taking Chinese here, might be able to meet with a professor and kind of talk about what is required for CLS and see if maybe you are on track to be eligible. Michael, did you have a thought?
I did. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're totally fine.
Is the level of Chinese you're in, if it's okay to ask, is it first or second year? Because if it's second year Chinese, then you would still be fine. Because even if you've only taken 1 year of Chinese at UK, you can say, I tested out of the first year. So
Right.
you've done the equivalent of 2 years of college Chinese.
Right. So like if you tested into Chinese 201 and you've taken 201 and 202, I think she might be. Are you
Yeah,
coming?
so I'm currently in 101, but I was able to possibly test out, but I decided to stay in it so I could work on my listening. But I have been learning it for, like I said, over 2 years with different applications. Like I have so many Chinese apps, shows, movies, everything. So I do feel like I'm more fluent than the level I'm currently at, but I didn't know if it just specifically had to be on the transcript.
Not necessarily. I think, do you know what you tested into by any chance? What class?
I
What level?
think I could have just jumped one level.
Okay. Okay. In that situation, I would probably recommend, and you can reach out to me and we can kind of talk through a little bit more, but I would probably have you have a conversation with your current professor and see if they can kind of give you some guidance, but we can help you with that as we go along.
Okay, yeah, and so the reason I stayed in the current level that I'm in is because I felt like my listening wasn't so well, but I can
Right.
actually read a lot. So
Okay. Right.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great. All right. I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm gonna see if you all have thoughts. Who would you all recommend we ask for a recommendation, a language professor or an advisor? Does anybody have a thought?
I would actually ask like the professor that you think can speak to your academic and like engagement abilities the most. I think I asked like an honors professor. I didn't even ask someone who was like who could speak to my language abilities. But my professor, I think, just like knew me and knew my like interests outside of school and as well as like my learning style and like the things I was working on in school. And so I think just like the professor that can speak to your abilities the most is probably the person who can advocate the best for you. But that might be different for each person's case. I just felt like that was the person who could advocate for me strongest.
I agree with me here. I think if the language professor that you were considering knows you well, they're a fantastic option, but they're not the only one. I think choosing the person who can speak to your learning capacity and who you are as a person is by far the most important.
I agree. Excellent advice. Looks like Emma's having some technical difficulties with the application. Emma, if you want to reach out to me at my email on the screen, I can connect you with somebody at CLS that hopefully can help you with those. Okay. Here's a question about the citizen diplomacy application. Oh, sorry. Regarding the citizen diplomacy aspect of the scholarship program, in what ways did you share American values and promote American influence during your time with your respective programs?
CLS Chinese was very apolitical. We did not get into many controversial things or stereotypes between the US and China. Of course, that's only one aspect, but I actually want to, I guess, look back further to when I did the high school equivalent of CLS because I actually was with people in person. What I hope that's okay. That's moving a little back from CLS as it is right now. But for me, I feel like a big part of sharing American values was sometimes just hanging out with a friend you've made in your host country and getting to know each other, talking about what life is like in my case, South Korea versus the United States, or giving a presentation maybe on your part of the country. Like you can talk about Kentucky. A lot of people outside of the United States don't know about it outside of fried chicken and basketball. So you can talk about what it's like growing up in this part of the United States. When I was in South Korea, people wanted to know about politics, but CLS does not really want you to talk about that. So I feel like the best way to be a citizen diplomat is just to share your experiences growing up wherever you grew up in the United States and talking about how being American shapes your view of the world. And I think something else they really want is for you to really develop those meaningful friendships and get to know people, because it kind of just comes naturally. You're talking to people and things go from there. You start to share your backgrounds and learn from each other. So I guess it's kind of cheesy, but I think that's the best way to be a citizen diplomat.
I think a lot of it is also culture. So I used to have like thrice weekly like video calls with my language partner this past summer, and we would just ask each other like, what did you eat for dinner? Like, what's the weather outside like? What's that bird that's like making that weird noise in the background? Stuff like that. And I think like just kind of understanding like what each other's like home is like, what each other's lives, what each other's even days are like, is the biggest way to build those connections and share that culture. And like we would ask each other what music we listen to, and shared like movies and things like that. And so it's like really, really small at first, at least like very small things about your culture and like who you are as a person that slowly like translate into a bigger picture about like what it means to be American or like what it means to be Tanzanian or something like that. And I think a lot of it is like, as Michael was saying, just like developing those connections with the people who you're talking to, because a lot of times people have like preconceived notions about the United States. And so they'll ask you questions about it. And you can sort of give your perspective on that and talk about your own life and what it means to be American. So it's not necessarily like what are politics like in America, or like what do we think about this and this. A lot of it is just like seeing each other on more of a human level and becoming friends with people that you might never be friends with otherwise. And so I think that's what a lot of the sharing is, just like really, really small, like personal things that build this bigger picture.
All right, thank you so much. I think we have two more questions. This is a fun one. What is your favorite aspect of being a CLS scholar? And do you have any parting advice for applicants? If you were in our shoes, what do you wish you would have known before or while applying? They want you to be their crystal ball, and I like it.
Part of what I liked most, I'm going to share two things. One from my in-person experience in high school, and one from being online this last year, because they each had their pros and cons. So I want to share what I liked the best about both, since we don't know what this upcoming year will be like for sure. Being online, my favorite part was probably the teachers. My teacher was really nice, and even though I never got to meet her in person, she was fantastic at her job, and we really built a good teacher-student relationship, all of us. We became very close as a class, even though it was online. So I think my favorite part of the online program was that despite the virtual nature, you could still really get to know people. And having those relationships is important to learning, because sometimes you just need to be comfortable. And as you get to know your teacher, even as they're challenging you and making you speak a language that you may not feel confident in yet, it makes all the difference. as for what I like the most about in-person programs, it's very specific to what I did. But when I was in South Korea, I really liked doing a lot of the typical things a Korean high school student might do, like go to karaoke with your friends or go to the, I don't know what it's called. Like, you know how UK just opened a new cafe with computers? I don't know what that's called, but they're a really big thing in South Korea. So just like going to those with your Korean friends and like stuff like that was really fun. So I think the best part about an in-person program is just doing the typical things a college student your age in the country you're studying in would do. I really love that.
I think my favorite thing, so we used to, a lot of the, like my teacher and like my language partner would send us recipes to try, of like local food. And so having to cook those, which is, and eat like Tanzanian food, which I've never had before, was really, really fun because you get to try so many new things and they're super authentic. And everything was really good. So that was definitely probably the best part. Even though I couldn't be over there and eat it, I could still eat it at home. And then something that I think I would have given like advice I'd give to my past self writing the application is it's okay to not know a lot, like to not know a lot about the language itself, as long as you're intentional and you still are really passionate about learning it. And like mistakes are okay. It's like we used to mess up all the time, like even in week 8, like the final week of the program, we would still mess up on like basic grammar, or vocabulary, and saying like make stupid mistakes. But I think as long as you're really intentional with the application, and you're okay with messing up because you learn from the mistakes that you make, I think that transparency, is not something that like you should be worried about. I think it's actually something that you should, kind of celebrate and like really emphasize like, yes, I'm sure I'll mess up, but like I'm going to learn from my mistakes, and that'll make me that much of a stronger speaker, like that much of a stronger applicant, and advocate of, like the culture exchange. So don't be worried about messing up, because that's how you learn.
I should probably give my 2 cents too about advice. I was getting really into talking about the stuff I like, but I agree with me here. The best thing you can do is don't be embarrassed or ashamed. Learning a language is difficult. And something I often think of when learning a language is we all learned English as young children. We all learned whatever language we speak at home as children, and it took us several years to learn it. In a way, it's the same thing now. It's going to take a long time to reach true fluency if that's what you're reaching for. And that's okay. Everyone's in the same boat as you. And for a lot of people in a lot of the world, just the fact that you're learning the language goes a long way. People really appreciate it.
Excellent. And what I hear is that Mihir is going to have us all over for dinner for Tanzanian food. That's what I heard. That's going to be my favorite part of this. All right, just one more quick question. My senior year of high school, I lived abroad in Brazil. That's awesome. Portuguese requires a year of study for CLS. Does that hinder my ability to apply? Claudia, I'm not sure. Do you mean, does that like disqualify you from applying if you lived abroad in Brazil? If you could clarify for us, we might be able to answer that better. Is Claudia still here? I know we've had a couple people. Oh. Oh, just because she doesn't have Portuguese on her transcript. I would say no. I would say kind of similar to what we talked about before, as long as you're kind of able to quantify how much Portuguese you were able to learn while you were in Brazil. I think it would be kind of a similar thing to that. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
No, I think it's the same thing. I think being able to talk about how much language you learned when you were there and maybe ways that you've kept it or enhanced it or tried,
Right.
would be important in talking about the background year.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that is all of our questions. If anyone else has a question, if you want to unmute, you certainly can, or send it through the chat. This is our last call for questions. You're very welcome, Elena.
John, did you want to make an announcement about the education abroad requirement for students who receive the award?
Or Olivia.
Yeah.
There, yeah, I can do that. So whoever receives the award would just be needing to work with me probably to get into our system and make sure you're registered with everything. But whenever a recipient is notified, they can always reach out to me and I can get them started on everything they need to do.
Great, thank you. All right, well, thank you so much to our two rock stars for joining us. I know you all have very, very, very busy lives, and so I'm so thankful. And thanks to all of you all who have been watching. We had a ton of awesome questions, and I hope that several of you are planning to apply. As I said, please reach out to me. We cannot review everyone's applications on November 16th at 4 p.m. So keep that in mind. So just make sure that you are thinking about your applications early and getting us those drafts to review as soon as you can. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Other than that, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, and Michael and Mihir. It was lovely to see both of you and hear about your experience. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yep. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Good luck in your graduate studies, Michael. Keep us
Thank you.
in touch
I-
with what you're doing.
Definitely missing Kentucky. Of course, really love grad school too, but I miss UK. So I'm glad to hear things are going well there.